5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Coach's Corner on the Fitter and Faster platform. Today, I'm really excited to have somebody who has gotten his way back into racing, back into full-time compete mode almost, while also keeping one foot squarely in the coaching pool. My guest today, Austin Surhoff. Austin, welcome to the Coach's Corner.
Thank you for having me, Michael. And appreciate the shout out to the coaching. That is also still very much going on as I'm doing all this in the pool.
Yeah, your Instagram and your social media has been blowing up with all the different things you're doing as far as racing goes. You were down at the Richmond meet where you actually posted a few lifetime bests. You also, and I got a lot of people wanting me to ask you this, had some interesting recovery cold water plunges. Let's break the ice today, quite literally. Talking about your recovery methods between some swims.
How long have you been sitting on that pun, man? Were you just like chomping at the bit before we started this podcast? Like, I cannot wait for the break the ice line.
Listen, man, it's 12 degrees here in Rochester today, so it was easy.
That was a good one. So like, yeah, let's break the ice. You want the river plunge that I did? It stems back to how I started the new year, actually. I woke up, my wife and I woke up New Year's morning, and I'd been a fan of Wim Hof, whose breathing techniques I work into my pre-race routine and what I do every day. I take cold showers from time to time. And, you know, it seems like this is the year of all years where people are like, I want to do X to start the year and, you know, feel a fresh start, feel cleansed. So the very first thing I wanted to do to start the new year was a cold plunge. So I hopped in the frigid Chesapeake Bay. It was 44 degrees. Fitter Faster actually posted it on the Instagram. It was very nice of everybody to do that. And my dog actually followed me in there, the little psycho. Yeah, we're talking 15 degrees below an ice bath, and my dog went in and then came back out. He was like, whoa, immediately regret this. And I liked it so much that I decided to do it weekly, and I wasn't going to let a swim meet get in the way of that. So Saturday after prelims, I did a quick swim, just like an out and back, because I wanted to progress from a plunge as I go. I was on week 3 and I was like, it's time to do some strokes, take a swim. And that was only about 10 seconds. So I was like, I really need to like do something cool with it, like something that is actually impressive instead of just hopping in and hopping out every time, because you got to make progress. All of this is always about progress. So day 2, I was like, wait, I usually have access to some sort of ice bath at these USA swimming meets. They usually have a communal ice bath you can sit at, and the athletes can just hop in, they maintain it. It's the great temp, and it's a great way to recover after your prelims race. So I combined the two. I was like, you know what? There's no ice bath at this meet. We have the social distance. I need to get a cold plunge done. So, and it was a beautiful, beautiful day on that Sunday. I think it was like 45, 50 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. So I hopped in the James River and I waded in to about my belly button, and I stayed there for 25 minutes, just making FaceTime calls with my wife and some friends, posting to social media. I was literally on my phone while these people are walking down the street, like texting with, you know, my belly button up to my belly button in 40-degree river water. And people were like, huh? And I'd be like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm doing it. But it worked, man. It literally had the same effects as the ice bath, and my legs felt amazing that night for the 100 final.
Do you feel like, Austin, some of that is really positive in the way that it reflects mentally and emotionally during competitions and maybe some of your hard training?
Is really important. So like at the meet, I spent a lot of meets, and we all do, you know, you come home from prelims, you eat a massive breakfast, and you go to sleep for 3 hours, and that's all you do all day. And that's fine. You know, I'm going to do that at most meets. You know, when I go to the Olympic trials this summer, I'm going to do a whole lot of nothing. But I really just wanted to explore maybe something a little bit more balanced. Like, let's get some sunshine, right? Let's get out in nature. Let's let me take my mind off the meet for a couple hours and actually not just physically decompress by relaxing and resting and napping and doing all those good things that you're supposed to do. You know, I took a nap that afternoon once I got back from the ice bath. But also injecting a little bit of what's good for you in overall life outside the swim meet too. And yeah, it was great for my emotional state. I went 50.0 like 4 that morning. And so I, you know, if I had been inside all day, I'd be in my mind like, God, what could I have done? I wanted a 49 so bad, just sitting on it all day and burrowing deeper and deeper in my mind. And instead I said, you know what, let's go do something fun that's also beneficial instead. And I think that day it worked really, really well.
I
went
so
49
too.
And to spoiler, I went 49 that night. It worked.
That's right. So I want to dive into this, and I know we had just talked about what we were going to start out with, but I think this is great content, especially for coaches and athletes to keep in mind. When we go through the age group progression and even into senior swimming, we tend to get a little superstitious, right, about our routines. We have to make sure we follow this routine, follow this schedule when we're at a big meet like that, when we're at juniors for our first time. And we really want to stick to that. And all day, all we're thinking about is the performance at night. But with the many years of experience you've had at extraordinarily high level meets, gaining a little bit of perspective between your performances from prelims and finals at this competition, and maybe you've done it in the past, really benefited you at night at an age where we're not typically seeing, we're starting to see more of it, right, as the sport evolves, but we're not seeing great best times and drops like you had at this meet.
And on top of that, I wonder if old me could have, because I would get really wiped in prelims. Like I've always been a very like muscular swimmer for my events, especially in the 200, when I was doing a 200 IM and a 200 back. And I would often go slower at night because I'd be so wiped from prelims. And now I'm training less and I went faster at night, right? Seeing things, talk about the superstition, seeing things in the aggregate has been really important to me. And I'm going to bring this up again later. I know that I will when we talk about any sort of training or anything like that. But I also was superstitious, even though I didn't really have a warm-up routine or, you know, I wasn't super great about other sorts of routines besides hitting an ice bath, besides getting a Epsom salt bath every night. I was superstitious about maybe the playlist that I listened to or what was I supposed to eat for breakfast. And yeah, I guess that's a better way to put it than superstition is. I always felt like I was supposed to do things at these meets. And I was contradicting myself was it would usually change from meet to meet. I never actually developed a good meet routine. So it was this awful balance of superstition that I'm supposed to be doing something, but then not even developing the routine work. And people benefit from routine at big meets, by the way. You know, you can't control a lot about big meets, and the best thing you can do is hone in on yourself and control what you can control. And routine can definitely help with that. But what I meant about the aggregate is if you know that you need to warm down for 25 minutes and then go home and take an hour nap and then eat X for breakfast. Sometimes it's okay to say, okay, I only had, 20 minutes to warm down. This happened at US Open back in November. They closed the pool because they had to clean it for the day when I was like 15 minutes into my warm down from the 50 freestyle. And I was like, okay, it's okay. I got my 15 minutes, as long as I'm staying, let's say like 95%, like an A grade or an A minus grade on everything I'm doing. I'm still going to eat a good meal. I'm still going to get a nap, seeing the big picture boxes that I'm checking, then I'm still going to get what I need from everything that I'm doing, if that makes sense. It's not, I need to listen to this song at 6 p.m. It's more hit big picture boxes and understand what they're doing to set you up for success. And then you give yourself a little, a couple percentage points of wiggle room that if your routine isn't exact, you can still fall back on it as a routine and trust it. Right. I would have loved to get an A minus in school. So anytime I'm like, you know what, I give myself about a 92 for sticking to everything that I could do throughout that. After the 100 prelims, I talked to a couple of people in the warm down pool for like 10 minutes instead of warming down. But I looked at the aggregate. I got myself an ice bath. That is a bonus compared to what I did the day before for the 50. So I guess overall, when you're at a meet, really, really try to zoom out and see the big picture of what you're doing and understand perspective and give yourself credit in the aggregate to sticking to whatever routine instead of making it an obsessive, superstitious type thing.
What an incredible perspective, right? And aren't there times when you're thinking about this now, and even in your explanation to me in the last 2 minutes, boy, I wish I had thought this way as a younger athlete.
Me too. And by the way, this is hard earned, because this is not how I was up until age 25 when I first retired. So I agree with you. You know, put me in a time machine and put my 30-year-old brain in an 8-year-old's body.
It's got to be pretty fun for you now, Austin. You're working at one of the best educational institutions in the world at Johns Hopkins University, which also happens to have a top 10 Division III swimming program and traditionally has had athletes perform extraordinarily well. And it's led by another North Baltimore alum in Scott Armstrong. How have you taken your experiences as an athlete and parlayed them into helping the program at Johns Hopkins?
Well, that's evolved over the years in a really nice way, I hope. I mean, we'll see this year, especially after what I've experienced. You know, I will call it, just from my perspective, the success I've experienced over the last couple months as an athlete. But, and by the way, Scott, NBAC alum and NBAC coaching alum. He was actually my coach on and off for most of my life growing up, whether it was my head coach or an assistant in the group I was a part of. So Scott and I have a pretty amazing relationship, and I really cherish being able to be there. But back to your question. So when I first started there in the 17-18 season, I was coming a couple times a week as a volunteer. And it was really, really important to me. And I actually looked at a couple cover letters where I wrote this in there, that I wanted athletes to feel like they had an ally through the process of college, you know, like really play into the young guy card that I had. Because at this point I was 26 years old, going into 27 throughout that year. And relative to coaching peers, I was younger because I stayed in the sport till I was 25, while they were, you know, coaching from 21 onward. So I was a very youthful coach, and I really wanted to parlay just how recently I'd experienced swimming into helping understand the athletes, put my brain into their brain, and just try to empathize with them as best they can. It worked out really well in that way, that I really felt like I was good at making connections with the athletes. My first year at Hopkins, and then, you know, UVA, my second year, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but when I was a volunteer there, it was really important to me to develop relationships with the athletes and just kind of trust that the system, just trust that you as a whole are a good coaching staff. Again, the aggregate, just understand that we're getting the athletes what they need, you know, day to day, generally, and to really focus on developing the personal connection with them. I think that's super important. Now, I'm also speaking as someone, again, my first year, I had very little pressure on me as a twice a week volunteer into a part-time coach in the second semester of the year. So I had space, you know, to do that. And the answer to your question, back to how have I parlayed that experience, once I started doing fitter, faster clinics, and in 17 onward, and once I started slowly getting myself back into swimming, and I was really experiencing the workouts that I was actually giving my athletes, especially in the sprint group, I would actually test out the skills on myself first. And this one's good, this one's garbage. And it felt good to be able to give them something that I was willing to give myself. Now, that's not true when I'm working the 400 IMers, you know, and I'm giving them a breaststroke workout that is, you know, like a 3,000 worth of breaststroke throughout the practice. But, you know, if I'm crushing people on racks and towers one day, I'll be like, you know what, guys, I did this on Tuesday and you're in better shape than me. So let's get to work. I'm not trying to kill you. Experiential learning has been super important to me. And then selfishly, I've really enjoyed it because the best form of learning is teaching. So by teaching these athletes stuff, I'm also weeding out inefficiencies in my own training where I give them something and it doesn't quite connect with them, or maybe it's not the best thing ever that they tried that day. Then I weed that out of my training. And so the two have been in a really nice concert with each other. And the evolution as a coach and an athlete for me, I know we're pulling it back to me instead of the coaching, but it's been a really nice evolution over the last couple of years. I hope the athletes have enjoyed it. I went back to Hopkins in the 1920 season. I'm going to be back with them this year when we get started on February 1st, Monday of next week. And I'd like to continue to parlay what I've learned into coaching them again, because I haven't been able to do that since March, and I miss it very much.
So Austin, let's say we're on the pool deck at Hopkins and you have a, late 19-year-old, early 20-year-old come up to you and say, hey, I'm really struggling right now with the schedule, and COVID's been such a challenge, and we all know Johns Hopkins is going to be academically challenging.
Mm-hmm.
What types of things are you saying to help mentor those athletes through these uncertain times? Because a lot of us in the coaching community right now are being more aware of a lot of the psychological, emotional effects that this pandemic has caused. And though I want to avoid talking about the pandemic, I think it is important and it's vital for coaches to understand their role right now as somebody that these kids can rely on to provide an experience every day that takes them away from the distractions of this year. So what would your advice be to a student athlete like that?
Thank you for that question, because that is something that's super important to me, is to provide a safe space where not that the pandemic doesn't exist. I'm not going to act like we can just plug our fingers in our ears and say it. And by the way, on my own podcast, not to plug it, I've also had this almost stubborn rule of I don't want to talk to the pandemic when I talk to people about their careers. I'm trying to focus on the athletics. So that being said, the athlete comes up to me. I would really ask them to look at the big picture and come from a place when I'm talking to them that I trust that they are doing the best they can in school and in the water, because all these kids at Hopkins and, all college swimming programs, the vast majority of kids are these amazing kids that are busting their butts. So what I would say was, anything you did between March and now, because again, we haven't had pool access since March. And what I would tell them is, everything you've done between then and now was a bonus, was an advantage. You're a Division III swimmer. We were literally not allowed to coach you. Okay. Unless, people requested a workout here or there, you could, be like, hey, maybe you want to do this. I don't know. Anything you did on your own was above zero, was above, normal, above zero. You moved forward throughout the pandemic. If you need to just kind of take a step back and detach from the pressure of being perfect today, then please do that. And look at, again, the aggregate. Between then and now, if you stayed ahead, you're still ahead. So put some of that pie chart of your brain, put it into school. That's fine. When you come to practice, I still expect you to do everything that I ask you to do to the best you can, but maybe detach from the results of what you put up in practice. Maybe don't worry about your times in these 50s breaststroke that I'm about to give you, right? Maybe focus on your stroke count. Maybe focus on the effort that I'm expecting of you. If I'm saying, hey, try to hold 28s, put in the effort that it takes to go 28s. And then whatever you're at today, that's what you're at today, right? It's really a detachment from results expectations. I know the whole process over results thing has been pounded into the ground, and it's not anything new when I say that. It's worked really well for me as an athlete so far to be able to invest in my process, but just look at the big picture. Seriously, just try your best to look at the big picture and understand that you are just such a good, hardworking kid. The fact that you're here at Hopkins, you don't have a scholarship, you're on this varsity team while you're a double major, let's say you're pre-med, and then also bioengineering. I'm already goofing this up. This is why I didn't go to Hopkins. It's okay. Just giving yourself some credit, and just to kind of give people an idea of what I mean by that. I was kind of bummed about my swimming career when I retired in 16, and then doing fitter, faster camps and seeing how excited people were to learn from me because of the career I had gave me perspective on, wow, I'm actually this good at swimming, right? And so I would tell the kid, you're actually this good at everything that you're doing right now. So just give yourself some credit and understand that you're ahead right now and take stock of that. You're not behind, you're ahead right now. And just take stock of it from that perspective. And then every step you take from there will be forward.
If we focus on that, I think we're going to be in the right headspace for when things get back to any sort of normal schedule, which I think is going to be faster than a lot of people think.
Well, we've already seen it. People are already going fast, man. I mean, people are going really, really fast. I think I was not aware of this article. And so this is kind of off the cuff. I've been thinking a lot about the advantage of the pandemic for a long time, and it feels so uncouth to say it. So I might give like 10% of how I'm feeling to this. But that's honestly how I've tried to think about it since about April of last year is, am I safe? Am I secure? Are my wife and I putting a roof over our heads? Okay, yes. And that in and of itself is privilege. Okay, so please, anyone listening, I understand that. But moving forward, take stock of that and then move forward from there. And anything you move forward with is an advantage for yourself. So I'm going to have to read that article because it speaks to my approach basically since April of last year of how can I move forward? How can I see the positive? How can I, take advantage of what's going on? And I guess, it probably comes from a long history for me of taking advantage of things like that. When I won the 200 IM in 2010, it was this weird down year where I was 2 seconds slow. And I'm not cheapening my accomplishments when I say this. I give myself credit for this. Everyone that had been in college the year before had access to the tech suits and the 2009 NCAAs, and the times ballooned through the roof, right? And then I come in. I had never used an arena or a JKIT. We were only allowed to use Speedo because Bob and Michael were very intense about that at MBAC. And I come in and I didn't care about the tech suits. And so I was able to move forward because I wasn't affected by it. And then, when I finaled in 2012 and 2016 in the 200 IM at the Olympic trials, guess what the event is where everyone that's good at it is already an Olympian by the last day? The 200 IM. And so people scratch out, people are a little checked out, but guess what? I'm not. I move forward. And so now, best time in January when I didn't have pool access outside of a backyard pool, which again, privilege, get it, until September of last year. It's because I found a way to move forward. So now pulling back out of talking about myself, because I understand that I'm really just trying to make a point. We really have to take the stock of the situation as zero, like neutral, not at a deficit. Because if you're putting yourself at a deficit, you're only climbing out of the hole. You have to take stock of reality as neutral, as what it is, because that's how you move forward and start putting points on the board, right?
I really like that perspective, Austin, and I'm taking some notes because you said a lot of things that really resonated with me there. You said a phrase earlier, and I think this is a great segue for what we were just talking about. You said experiential learning. Mm-hmm. You were very fortunate from a very young age to have some tremendous coaches, and those coaches seem to progress to higher levels all the way through your NCAA experience. And now really you're your own coach. And from the perspective that we've gleaned already, you have a lot of good ideas to remind yourself. But as an age grouper in the famous North Baltimore Aquatic Club with Tom Himes and John Cadigan and the whole crew, Scott Armstrong, Paul Yetter, Bob Bowman, going through that experience and using the phrase experiential learning, what are some things that you developed early on in that program that could be very intimidating for a lot of age group athletes?
Yeah.
The expectations are extraordinarily high. What was it like navigating that experience as a youngster?
I was equipped in a way that was pretty unique. As many people know, my dad, BJ, was a pro baseball player for a long time. And his best season came when I was 8 years old. So I grew up in a household where my dad was an active, professional, famous athlete. And my mom was a better athlete than the both of us. She just, because of women's swimming in the 80s, there was no extensive career for her to have. So growing up in a household like that, where I'm going into, the Orioles locker room when I'm 6 years old after games to see my dad, And baseball was a scary thing to me, admittedly not of any fault of my dad, because it was tough to follow in his footsteps. And my mom's shadow just wasn't as long because it's not in the press as much. When you're 6, it's hard to sort out what accomplishments are unless they're in front of your face.
And Austin, she was close. She was narrowly missed making the Olympic team.
She was 3rd in 84. That's correct. So when I got to MBAC, I was 9 years old, and I wasn't really like in on swimming. I was just, my dad and my mom just made me go to practice because I was really good at swimming in our backyard pool. And I loved being underwater. I loved just playing in the pool. And I'm going to actually come back to that later if we talk about swimming that I'm doing right now. I loved to play. And so when I went to swim practice, I was immediately a natural. It is what it is. You know, a lot of people just have genetic gifts that end up being good at the sport. And, but I wasn't really aware, like they had this watch party for Michael at Meadowbrook for MBAC at the 2000 Olympics when he was 15. And, you know, I'm 9, 10 years old. The kids that I was friends with in that group have been swimming since they were 6 or 7. So they're like looking at the screen with their mouths agape, like, oh, Michael's at the Olympics. And for me, I had just come from, you know, at this time, my dad was at the Atlanta Braves. So he was on this Atlanta Braves team that was, you know, first in the AL and was about to win their whatever straight divisional title. So I didn't care what some 15-year-old was doing at the Olympics. I actually remember being like, he got 5th. That's not even a medal. And not because I was a brat, just because when you're younger,
right,
you think, you know, the Olympics, Olympics medal, USA is supposed to get medals as well. You know, I grew up in a household where I was taught about how great USA was at the Olympics. So I think being removed from that when I first got started was really important. It gave me a very high level of precociousness. You know, I was early on having dialogue with my coaches. John Burke was my first one, and actually Bob Bowman. They were my first age group coaches. And I remember being pretty chatty with them on a level, not, you know, not feeling like I'm a kid, you know, talking up like, Mommy, Daddy. It was more just like, you know, like I felt like I was speaking to them actually from a young age. And I think that's the through line throughout my career that led to me wanting later on now at Hopkins to say, I want my athletes to have an ally and I want to talk to them on a level playing field. Is my experience throughout MBAC growing up, Tom Yetter, who is Paul's younger brother, Scott Armstrong, Paul Yetter, all of these people were like 27 to 35 when they were coaching me. Probably more in their 20s, right? And so they had this young guy vibe, and they all had kind of this respect for me to talk to me like person to person. It wasn't like a condescending way. And I think that gave me space again to not feel the weight of MBAC for a long time. You know, we had this age group that Tom Yetter coached, like the 12 and unders on our team. And I just wanted to go to practice and hang out with my friends. And then when I heard about All-Stars, my friends gone All-Stars when they were 10 and done well. And I wanted to do well at All-Stars when I was 12 because they did well. So I won All-Stars. I won Maryland States. And then it was like, well, you get a free basket if you go to zones. Well, I want to make zones. So I made zones. It wasn't any of this Michael Phelps footsteps stuff really until I was like a high schooler and he started, you know, the Beijing thing happened, right? Even like in 2004 in Athens, I didn't really watch those Olympics that closely. So I think showing up when I was 9 or 10 instead of 6 or 7 and having another sport that kind of weighed over me as something that was a little bit more important really gave me, I'm trying to think of the right word, precociousness, just like a level of, I think aloof has a negative connotation, but just not getting swept up in it and feeling pressure from a young age. And also my parents did a really good job of giving me that space as well.
Absolutely. And you know, your point is well taken that you were able to lean into probably some advice that many other athletes your age don't necessarily have. Your parents are titans in their own sports. And then as an age grouper, you're having access to Bob Bowman. And I think that gives a lot of people some good perspective too, Austin, because all too often I see in the coaching community, when you first get started, and I got started at a very small Division III school, coaches think that they will never be able to get to a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob was coaching the age groupers and doing it dutifully and probably enjoying it, knowing the way that his mind works, right? So I think it's really important for people to hear that. Here was Bob Bowman coaching some 10, 11, 12-year-olds.
And when I was a pro in his training group, in 2015 and 16, kind of like a full circle thing, I remember thinking about that. He would still talk to me about, every once in a while, he would remember names of kids I was friends with when we were 9 and 10 that he coached that quit swimming when they were 12. He hadn't thought about them in 10, 12, 13 years. So yeah, Bob was definitely into that at the time. But like, it wasn't even, and this is not on Bob because I appreciate working with him later on, but I didn't really need to be coached by Bob Owen when I was 8. I think that's lending to your point of what kids need when they're younger. I mean, Tom Yetter, who didn't get the accolades at the time, he's the one that took me from, this yappy 10-year-old that was coming to practice to someone that was making zones at 12 and then winning zones at 14 and setting myself up to make the national junior team with Scott Armstrong the next year. So as long as the coach is invested in what's going on with the kid, starts giving them a sprinkling of equity. Obviously that varies from kid to kid. I think I had a very strong sense of self when I was younger relative to other kids that gave me access to that equity, and just gives them space to allow their love for the sport blossom. Then it's probably the right coach for the kid. I mean, one thing that Tom did really well, we had this really tight-knit group of boys in our group that were, from age 11 to age 14. There was like 6 or 7 of us that were thick as thieves. We did summer league together. We would come to swim practice together every day, and he would give us space to just kind of be little 12-year-old jerks. But it made me want to go to practice. Like, I want to see my friends. That sounds awesome. And then it would make me better.
I remember one time talking on the pool deck with Jason Turcotte. This is back when he was at Stanford, before he was at Dynamo. And he was watching a PASA practice, and he had said to one of the assistant coaches at PASA, who was yelling at some 12-year-old kids, "Hey, you got to let them play, right? You got to let them play. You got to let them enjoy why they're here." And
absolutely.
Sounds like you guys had that there.
It is. There was a sense for play. I don't even remember the workouts we did when I was 12. I know it was good work. I really do. Like, I know I put in work, and you have to put in work. I think that's super important. I really don't want anything I put out in the ether in this brief time that I have a platform to talk, to make people think that I don't think hard work matters. Hard work matters, especially when you're a young kid. You're setting up your aerobic engine for the rest of your life. It also has to be a balance for play, and the kids should not feel the weight of, your own stuff that you're projecting onto them. And that's a really hard thing to do. I mean, I do it to my dog. I know that sounds like I don't have a kid, so that's all I got. But like, I want my dog to go to the bathroom and, or go to the dog park, right? I'm like, dude, I'm trying to get you to the dog park. And the closer we get to the dog park, the more he freaks out and is like, let me get to the dog park, or like sees a squirrel, sees another dog. And it's like, wait, this is about him. I just want him to get to the dog park, right? And it's a really good line that I was taught by Eric Thurston, who's an assistant coach at Boston College right now. He was my my fellow volunteer at UVA for the 18-19 year. He said, and he ran the UVA swim camp as head counselor. And he said, camp is for the campers. And I think that's the best summation of all of what we're talking about right now, which is, even though it really is really, really, really hard to not project your own stuff onto, people that are in your charge, that are your wards, if you will, it's an important thing to try to do, because they didn't experience what you experienced. It was something that my dad was really good at. I have to pull it back to him just because the influence was so massive growing up in a house where everyone knows who your dad is, and you can't walk in a room without your dad walking in there first, metaphorically.
Right.
And I was so scared to tell him I was going to quit baseball when I was 14, and he was into it, and he got super into swimming, and me and my 3 other siblings all swam deep into our lives after that. And he still talks to me about college swimming to this day, even more than I know. I'll be like, Dad, I actually don't know what's going on with Missouri at that dual meet last weekend. So it's a good example of just not projecting your own stuff onto other people. And I do it as someone who does do that sometimes. And I do it when I coach sometimes. It's just important to keep tabs on.
I really like, and I'm going to share this with my staff today. Camp is for the campers. Practice is for our athletes. Mm-hmm. Practice is for our athletes to come and have that experience in their space. Now we shape it, but it's for them. And I think that's incredible perspective. So,
and we have bosses with expectations. Like I get that if you're coaching a program that's trying to break through the top 10, your AD expects, for example, at Texas, Wyatt and Eddie, they're never going to drop out of the top 10. But the AD does expect every sport to try and compete to be top 10 every year. So even a place like that, they have a directive they have to serve. So I totally get the balance that has to be made there, that you have expectations for performance, and the athlete's performance is your job. Totally get that. I just think that there's a roundabout way to get there that just involves a level of trust, I guess. Absolutely.
So here you are, you're a senior at North Baltimore. You've experienced everything that the program has to offer, training with some of the best athletes in the world, training underneath some of the most enthusiastic coaches in the world. And now you head to one of the coolest cities in the United States, Austin, Texas, and you start with the Longhorn program and Eddie Reese. What was the transition like from Bob, who you and I know is so super organized? The symphony of swimming that's playing in his head is so astute, and all of the plans are right down to the last minute detail. And then Eddie, who might have the same thing happening, but it seems
it's in his DNA. It's in his DNA. It's not on a piece of paper. It's like some sort of like microorganism thing. And by the way, I do know the question, but we just have to. Bob was not my coach after I was 8 years old.
Right.
But we are setting up. So are you saying when I first went to college?
Yes.
So the question you asked about Bob and Eddie, Bob was my coach after Eddie, so we can actually get to that then.
Cool.
But my coach in high school was Paul Yetter, who at the time was 29, 30 years old, coaching Katie Hoff, coaching myself, Felicia Lee, Elizabeth Pelton, Brennan Morris. I think every single one of those people made a national, and Dan Madwed. So that's a bunch of people that made a national A team or an Olympic team at some point in their lives. And then me, who is still doing very well. So the contrast between Paul and Eddie, Paul came in and he is from the school of Murray Stevens and Bob Bowman, where everything was mapped out. Practice was written out beforehand. He was keeping tabs. He was mapping out taper to the yardage, this subject that day. And to answer your question is I got there, and my experience with older coaches up to that point was that they were more, you go do this, and there was no equity, and I was basically just forced to do stuff. And I had a really bad taste in my mouth about that at that point. And then I get there, and Eddie is, older than Paul at this point. I'm not going to call him old, but spade's a spade. And was still, and Chris, both of these guys that had more success than any coach that I had dealt with up to this point were so unassuming. And they were just basically giving us the keys to so much of what was going on. And coming back to the trust that I talked about, the equity that we had in the culture of our team, the goals that we set. Even just reading us as he's delivering a workout and how we respond to like, no, Eddie, let's not do that today. And then he'll be like, he'll read it. And it's like, actually, they do need to do a little less today. And it's just, and then Chris, who is just like the empathy engine, because he knows everyone inside and out and is the most skilled person I've ever met at putting his brain in your brain.
I wanted to talk to you specifically about Coach Chris Kubik, because earlier in the episode here, when you were talking, you talked immediately. Your first inclination was to talk about when you first started as a volunteer, you wanted to connect with the athletes. And I thought of Chris, and maybe that's where some of that started. But when you look at a coach like Chris Kubik or a Jack Roach or a Harvey Humphreys at Georgia or Ted Napoli, Skip Kenny's assistant at Stanford, they all had a unique ability to tap into. And I think Jack Roach and Chris are probably the masters at it. So talk to us about that. Talk to us, unpack a little of Chris Kubik.
Well, I think if you map out, by the way, Chris and Jack are masters of that. Harvey, having never swum for him, but have known him for a long time, he might be better at it than both of them because
he's very good.
Well, because he was having the Georgia guys do stuff that made me want to just like curl up in a ball while we're doing, pretty mid, like right down the line stuff at Texas. Georgia's obviously chowing down on yardage. And I'd hear from Chase Kalish later on kind of stuff that Harvey would make them do. Maybe Harvey's the best of all of them at it because of the kind of work he had to manage out of them. But anyway, Chris, talking about connecting with the athletes, that was the starting point for my goals. Was I always felt like Chris was the one that could pierce the veil, because a lot of coaches, and I try not to do this, but a lot of coaches have like this weird like professionalism veil where you're almost like, they like don't want the athlete to know like what's going on. It's almost like it's got to be played to their vest, if you will. And it's their plan. And Chris was really good at like going meta on that and piercing through it and being like, yeah, I totally get how this is going. Like, I got it, guys. And he was so informed about everything that was going on with us that he would say stuff in a meeting and be like, wait, Chris knows about that? That's crazy. But then he would use that to inform something that was empathetic about how we were feeling. And I think wielding's the wrong word. Having the capability to wield what Chris wielded and using it in a way that was so focused on other people, the work that he put in to be informed, to understand every swimmer inside and out, to understand his head coach inside and out, and to use it in a way that was completely focused outward away from himself was very impactful on me. I mean, his only job in his mind, and I'm reducing it and speaking for him, he can speak for himself, was to support Eddie and support the program, right? Like give everything that he could to doing that. And the fact that this guy could have been a head coach anywhere else in the country, which is something we would say to ourselves when we were at practice, and really put himself in the position of being a true number 2 head coach, that whether him and Eddie were discussing something behind the scenes, when he was out on the deck, they were in concert with each other. And he was speaking along those lines while also managing how the athlete was feeling too. So those are the 2 things I try to manage. Is if Scott and I and Marge, our assistant coach, say something in the office together, I'm out there not breaking rank on that, but also kind of doing like a meta veil piercing thing where I tell the athlete without crossing some sort of insubordination line, like, yeah, man, I totally get what's going on here. Like, I totally get that we're kicking your butt today. Yeah, you got finals coming up. That really stinks, man. That really sucks. But this is what we're doing today. And I'm not pissed at you about it. I'm not going to ram it down your throat, but this is what we got to get done. And you just got to trust that because I'm being empathetic with you and trying to show understanding of where I'm coming from giving this practice to you, that you're going to give me your best and just do what you can that day, even if we are kicking your butts this week. Or, Scott asked us to really ramp up the work or crush them in one place or another. It's a balance between empathy and also executing what your head coach asks you to do without insubordination, because that's really super important.
I love that response, Austin. And the thing that I'm getting from listening to you is you were aware, even as an athlete, that a coach like Chris Kubik was a bridge. He was a bridge between the athletes in the program and the head coach. You just happen to have a head coach who was also very finely tuned with what his athletes needed or wanted or what their goals were. There's a famous quote by Eddie, and it's something along the lines of, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and the rest will take care of itself. Talk to me about the importance of team at Texas and the moment that you kind of understood that I'm really part of something bigger than myself.
Holy crap. I can't believe you brought up that line, because I worked an edited version of that line into my wedding vows with my wife. That's how, and I had heard a different interpretation of the line at the time. It was take care of yourself, take care of your teammates, take care of Texas. I think both work perfectly. And it also, you answered your question with the line, is that sums up everything that comes into being a part of a team, a company, a partnership, a friendship, a household. Number one, you have to take care of yourself. You have to get your own oxygen mask on the airplane before you secure someone else's oxygen mask. And by the way, the wedding vow was, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of our family, or I'm going to take care of myself, take care of you, take care of our family, and the rest will take care of itself. Like, take care of myself, also take care of my wife, who is my partner in this partnership, right? And then take care of the marriage, which is like it's like the bigger picture thing that we are managing together. Okay. So to Texas, you have to take care of yourself. And that's what those guys do. No matter how much you care about the team or are someone who's naturally inclined to helping other people before yourself, your job is still to be successful as an individual for the University of Texas. Swimming is an individual sport. We're not passing the ball to each other on the court. So at the end of the day, the beginning of your job is putting yourself in the best place to succeed as an athlete and succeed as a student and succeed in life. I mean, when you succeed in life, the program looks good. So start there. Then once you are centered and settled, take care of your teammates. And what that means is being there for them. But you have to come from a place that you're not pulling too much from, number one, pulling out of the pool of taking care of yourself, right? You can do it for short stretches of time, but if you go above and beyond taking care of your teammates and putting your brain power out of yourself and into how your teammates are doing, then you're pulling away from the most base thing, which is taking care of yourself. So take care of your teammates and not be a jerk to them. And then lastly, what we were taught, take care of Texas. And what that means is take care of this nebulously defined thing that is our swim team. And people might think, well, that's just taking care of your teammates. No, when you're in a college swimming locker room, this thing that you all create together, this like shared, this shared narrative you have of what a swim team is, it is something bigger than yourselves. I always thought that was such a trite thing hearing growing up, like, you're representing something bigger than yourself. And then you actually are charged with taking care of something that is invisible, that doesn't really exist outside of our own imaginations. It really is something that physically exists in your mind when it's created. And so you have to take care of it. Everywhere you go in public, you're representing Texas when you swim for them. Everywhere you go when you leave Texas, you are representing Texas. And so taking care of that. But guess what? When teams function in a way that is maybe not the best, and this has happened, there were periods of this that happened when I was there, is people, all good people, all hard workers, stop taking care of themselves because they put so much into this super, super important idea of we have to take care of Texas. And guess what? You're grinding away at the self. You're not taking care of yourself again. So it has to happen in that order, right? And so what did I learn about being a part of a team? When I was there, when the team was in a good place, I was very externally motivated. I could swim outside of myself representing Texas. So that was my definition of being a part of a team there, was just doing it for Texas. So there were long stretches of time where I either didn't take care of myself, or I didn't take care of my teammates, or I didn't take care of Texas. And the times where I found my way back, I cleaved out everything that I had going on that was external and just focused internally. And that led me back to where I wanted to go. It has to start with the individual.
What I wanted to talk about with you next, Austin, is, I don't have intimate knowledge of what it must be like to be on deck with Eddie and a coach like Chris every single day. But the times where nationals have been there, the times where, even at a big meet or a Grand Prix, Eddie's door is wide open and anybody can go in there And he just seems to have this great sense of humor. Talk about how important that is to the culture there.
It's very important because he puts himself, I used the word unassuming earlier, and that is what he projects out there, is that he might secretly have an ego that gets stroked by everything that happens. He's not putting that out in the world. You know, we win NCs in 2010 and we come back and he's just really proud of us that we all got better and went best times at the meet. That's what it was about. And he was proud that we experienced that for ourselves. I think a couple good examples of his humor, him and Chris really, I think one of the things that comes with experience, and this is something that I've tried to work on in my own life that I think I'm pretty good at now, is as people have experience and experience success and experience these really cool situations in their life, they know how to make the special moments truly special for other people. And so, for example, 2010 NCAAs, we had a lot of pressure on ourselves. 2009, and I don't expect people to understand deep college swimming lore, but in 2009, Texas won in very disappointing fashion when Auburn rallied around Richard Quick on the men's side, being diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor, and won when they were supposed to get like fifth. And the Texas team had been favored very heavily. So 3 classes on this team in 2010 had been on the receiving end of that. And the meet was in the state of Texas. So it was a lot of like pressure, and we felt a lot of pressure. And a week out of the meet, Eddie made a deal with us that if we went, you know, X on a pace day, he would throw on a full body laser and do some breaststroke. Little known, well, not little known, everybody knows everything about Eddie. He was the 200 breaststroke record holder when he was at Florida on some level. I don't know if it was NCAA or SEC. And he set the 100 record going on the 200. So he was going to show us some of his breaststroke. So a week out of the meet, he comes into the locker room wearing his laser and a pair of sweatpants. And he's like waving at everybody like, hey. And we're all going nuts, losing it. And he does that before practice. And it just completely pops the tension balloon. Or another time when we were deep in summer training, getting our butts kicked, and we feel this building pressure about nationals. There was this, Jackson Wilcox, who was kind of our vocal leader around this time period for a couple of years. He's like, everybody, when we get to the wall in the next one, everyone drop down underwater and just stay there. Don't worry about missing the interval. Everybody just stay underwater for as long as you can. Now, the ego coach, myself included, I might have gotten annoyed about this, right? You might get annoyed, like, guys, we're trying to get stuff done here. Nationals is coming up. Eddie jumped in the pool while we were underwater. It was like, and we guess what? We got up, we all went nuts, and we worked our butts off the rest of practice. So,
and then how long, how much longer and for how many years are you going to tell that story?
For a long time. And that's what I mean about making the special moments special. I think it's really important to pull our heads out of the weeds. I really think that 3% special is as important as the 97% nuts and bolts. I focus a lot on that 3% these days, both as a coach and as an athlete. And it's something that I started developing when I was especially at Texas. And I think Eddie's influence was a big part of that.
You know, one thing all coaches should hear, and I'm going to write this down, is learn how to make the special moments special. Mm-hmm. Figure out
in their way. Remember,
yes.
Camp is for the campers.
Yes. And what a thing to try to learn to realize and have recognition of when something is special between the athletes, and we need to highlight this, Mm-hmm. What a great idea. And circling back, what do you think separates somebody like Eddie Reese, who's won so many NCAA titles, coached mm-hmm. so many Olympic medalists? What's something that separates him?
The best answer that not a lot of people give is Chris Kubik and now Wyatt Collins is why Eddie is different from everyone else. And it's because they filled the role. Chris trained Wyatt to have it, and that's why they didn't miss a beat, and they won 3 more NCAA titles after Chris left. They see themselves as just what does Eddie need? And they project this amazing, I don't think bubble's the right word. I really don't. But it works in such concert and such sync that there's no not ambition. There's no thoughts outside of the partnership and the relationship and making the team better, right? Texas is a place where you end up. So Chris Kubik isn't thinking about hopping to the next program because he did a good job for Eddie. He's thinking, how do I make Texas swimming the best program on earth for the next 40 years? Okay. And so once Eddie found the vein with, like we both said, it's in his DNA, the way that he coaches, and he's the guy, he's got the plan. And Chris did some coaching too. And Eddie, a lot of coaching, they're both amazing coaches, but Chris's role that he filled so expertly was giving Eddie space. How do I tinker this situation perfectly so that Eddie is in the best position to be a coach? I also think it helps that he came up in a time, he's obviously at this point, probably the longest tenured coach in the NCAA, one of them, and the most successful of the longest tenured coaches. He came up in the time when the NCAA was just much more chill and there was just less expectation on what was going on. I wasn't there in the 80s, so I'm talking out of my butt when I say that, but it is different from how things are now, where everyone's hyper focused on every single day. He carved out a legacy for himself by the time, 1992 rolled around. Sure. So creating that space for himself early in his career has given him space now that no one's bugging him about what he should be doing. And every coach deals with people bugging them about what they should be doing. That's the first answer. That's the contrarian answer. Now about Eddie and praising him. It really is that he's able to see what people need without ego. It really, really is that. He prides himself at his very, very core, at the very root of himself, that he just knows what people need. And being able to cut through to that without his own stuff being projected onto them is probably his best skill, because it allows him to think about exactly what is needed in the moment. And a lot of people think they know that, but Eddie actually does know what people need. And he cuts through a veil that is just much deeper than people understand. So that is my actual praising Eddie answer.
I love it, man. I love it. And you and I are going to have to do an episode too, because this is great stuff. And I haven't even gotten to the tip of the spear of some of the stuff I want to ask you. But before we close today out in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I do want to ask you this. And a lot of people are excited about this. Why are you swimming so fast right now?
Again, the root is in seeing the opportunity at the beginning of the pandemic. If I hadn't done that, then I would probably have gone backwards in the last year. So there's that. On top of that, I started a training plan because I had been training on and off, from a hobby perspective since about January of 18. I'd gone through phases. I was figuring things out. I briefly thought I wanted to be a 200 IMer, 200 backstroker again. And I think in September of 19 is when I started creating the theses for my training plan, which is when I go to the pool, I do what I want to do, and that's it. And the training plan has grown organically since then. Now, why am I able to do that? So September of 19, I was 28 years old. At that point, I had 15 years of experience training at the highest level with the best coaches. And I had been coaching my year at UVA, 18, 19, when I was a volunteer. I had access to just so much amazing information that they're doing there. I decided to trust my knowledge. And this comes back to how I coach athletes. I trust my knowledge that I have. And every day I just take care of myself. Remember, I said that I want all of my athletes to feel like they have an ally, someone with them on the journey that they're going through. Long stretches of my career where I was maybe going through some gullies, I didn't even feel like my own ally. I felt like I was just, a ghost pushing through practice because three months from now I had NCAAs. But then I lose 3-month stretches of my life in terms of how I think about it. I had great times in those 3 months and I cherished them. But then those 3 months are then retroactively shaded by how I did at that next meet. So if I did great at NCs, wow, I had an amazing January to March. I'll cherish those times forever. Oh, I had a bad NCAs. Well, January and February all of a sudden are just really crappy. And I don't even think about any good times that I had there. So I wasn't even my own ally. I was this weird passenger just kind of pushing through rough stuff for this end goal that I put a ton of pressure on and wouldn't always achieve. So I coach myself the way that I coach my athletes. I only do what I want to do on that day. And I started slow, patiently, understanding that I have limitless time to do this experiment. I want to swim till Tom Brady's in the Super Bowl at 43. So, 30-year-old NBA players are just now getting their second max contract because they're still in the prime of their careers. So trusting my expertise, that I have had access to, not my own expertise, trusting the genetic gifts that I have, it is what it is, trusting that in the aggregate, as long as I'm going to the pool and giving an honest effort of doing what I want that day, I'm going to move forward. And what's grown since September of 19, where I did have a base before that of training, and I've always been very active, is the training plan that has led me to go, 49 and 22.5 from being a 200 and 400 IMer all the way through age 25. It really has grown from what do I want to do that day. And now I actually have an actual training plan that I execute every week. It grew organically, and I give it space to evolve and change. I don't get too attached or superstitious about any one thing that I'm doing. And I allow my interests. Oh, part 2, I said I'd come back to play. I give myself space to play whenever I want. So we talked about giving kids space to do that, right? 12-year-olds need room to grow love for the sport. Doing these cold plunges is space to play. When my wife and I travel somewhere for a trip, I like to seek out whatever body of water I can find and hop in it. We were out in Colorado for a friend's wedding, and we were all on a hike around this lake. And I was like, I want to get in this lake. We just had this sweaty hike, and I was like, I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to get in and play. I don't really care. You guys can get in if you want. And I think that's the same way with my training. I'm doing this training. I'm going to go play. I don't care if whoever everyone else is, because I swim mostly by myself. I don't care if I'm not supposed to play. That's what I'm going to do. And you guys can try it if you want as well. And always having that lever to pull when through long stretches of my old swimming career, I never felt like I had that lever to pull. I never felt like I could quit or take time off, especially when I got to college and pro and the stakes got higher. I always felt like I had to keep pressing. There was never a step back that I could take. There was never this escape hatch I could jump through to give myself a reset. And the one time that I was actually pushed to a brink when I was in college and actually gave myself a reset, it's actually after my junior year. I had my worst NCAAs ever, and I was in a really, really bad spot with swimming. And the month of April, I mentally literally just checked out from swim practice. I went last in the lane, April and May. I still did the work, but I really focused on a couple classes I liked in school. I gave myself space to kind of play around with some weird stroke stuff in practice. And by the time June rolled around, I had totally reset, and I got 4th at trials and went under 2 minutes for the first time in the 200 IM. And then later made WUGs in the 200 free after not being a 200 freestyler my whole life. So I always want to have access to what I had that April when I reset myself without it needing to be an emergency. And that's number 3, is seeking out things that people generally need for fixing things that are at a deficit about themselves, and taking them and using them as an advantage for myself, right? Not waiting until I need something to use it. So people go to Pilates because they're 70 years old and their back's messed up, right? I go to Pilates because it is a competitive advantage for me. Or, I've seen a therapist on and off for a couple years to deal with panic disorder that I've had a long thing with. But I now do mental stuff on my own time that people might seek out when they're at a deficit. Now I use it for a competitive advantage because I used all those years of seeing those therapists, understanding their techniques to now apply it to move forward. So those are the three things: is doing what I want at practice, giving myself space to play, and always being in a space where things that are only used when your back's against the wall, just using them now, move forward with them. Like, they work for people at a deficit because they work. So you don't just have to move from -2 to 0. You can move from 0 to 2 with that same stuff as well. You know, having that escape hatch for yourself, even when you're doing great. Guess what? Tuesday, I went to the pool, you know, and I'm out of this meet, and you'd think, oh, he's just going to hammer the water. He's, you know, so full of confidence right now. I was feeling really, really bummed out that day. My dog had kept my wife and I up all night the night before. I was stressed out about a couple things that I had going on, and I did 200 yards and I hopped out and I went home. But I trust the aggregate. I'm not doing that every single day. It was just that day I needed to pull that lever, and I did. And then I dipped. And by the way, within those 200 yards, I gave myself space to play around with some new techniques. So don't wait until things go bad to pull the levers that'll help you move forward.
I love it. You know, I think you're going to find as you move on here, buddy, that you're going to be walking the pool deck for a very long time.
I hope so. Again, Tom Brady, 43.
And I even mean beyond that, Austin. You might have a stopwatch in the back pocket.
Well, I will on Monday. I'm going back to work for the dudes at Hopkins, and the ladies. And I actually haven't spun a stopwatch around my finger in March, and I kind of miss doing that. Everyone's got their little ticks that they have with their stopwatch, and I actually kind of miss that. It's going to be nice. It's like an old friend, that stopwatch.
We're going to jump on again in like a month or so and do a part 2, because all the things that you've said require more exploration. And I only bring guests back that we really, really like. So we're going to be excited about that. But before I let you go, 2 things. Talk to us about what you're doing with your new suit design, man. Talk about your relationships there.
Sure. I developed a line of suits with Fike Swim. You can tell by the sweatshirt, I'm super into it. It's my signature suit, and I'm really proud of it. I grew up, and it's basically, I design a suit, and there's other Fike Swim ambassadors that have designed their own suit designs. And it's a reflection of what matters to each person. And my suit is a reflection of what really matters to me, and also looks good on someone's body. It's got my signature on it, because anything that you put your name on, that's your responsibility. And I feel very proud of what I created. And the design that I landed on with James Fike, CEO, that I designed the suit with, is that of the bandana. The bandana, you know, I was trying to think of something maybe kind of like blue jeans, that's like very like American, very classic, very ubiquitously understand and is cool no matter how old you are. And it's also a representation throughout history of people that walk kind of a roguish path, that walk outside the lines, that seek out what's better instead of what's given to them. I think a lot about like the cowboys and the settlers of the Old West. Teddy Roosevelt wore a bandana. It's actually theorized that a lot of the Revolutionary War soldiers and George Washington wore paisley bandanas because French fashion was in at the time. You know, rappers and rock stars, they love busting out bandanas. And so I think it looks cool. It's a pretty dope design, and I'm really proud of it. But symbolically for me, I wrote my name on it, but I designed it for anyone who feels like they can walk the path of the outsider and be comfortable with it, and understand that they walk that path because they're finding everything that life has to offer instead of accepting what's given to them. So
did you ever hear the story of the Boston College lacrosse alum who had the red bandana in the trade centers and saved multiple people?
No. That's amazing.
You'll have to check that out on YouTube. The survivors remembered him because he had a red bandana.
That's incredible. Well,
really,
that's another,
yeah.
That's another bad mamma jamma that rocked a bandana.
I want to ask you some quick fire questions, and the first one's going to be near and dear to your heart. Ryan Lochte, world record, 154 flat. Is that in danger in Tokyo?
I think it depends on Chase as much as it does Ryan. I assume Ryan's working his butt off, but the strides that Chase Kalish has made in 200 IM over the last couple of years, and the way that he's grown into a very like strong adult body, just depending on where his focus is at, I think he's just as capable of setting that world record as Ryan is.
When we talk about Michael Phelps 400 IM 403, how close are we, do you think, to seeing that be in danger of getting broken?
That is a tougher one. I think it's got to be from a younger person that maybe grew up on that 403 and saw it maybe when they were 8 years old and trained themselves to do it, to break it later on. So if it comes from someone, it's not going to be because I predicted. I honestly, that 403 was a pretty unbelievable feat. Again, hinges on Chase, or I can't remember his name, but the Japanese guy that beat him last time. I think the 200 IM is more possible than the 400 IM, personally.
We might be looking at a 50 freestyle that requires a sub 21 second performance to win a gold medal. Do you think more than one person goes under 21?
I think it depends on people's hierarchical mental. It depends on Caleb Dressel's competitors' relationship to him. If they see what Caleb's doing and they say, I can do that too, then someone else will be there with him. But if and they don't want to admit this, but if deep down they're like, man, Caleb's setting the pace for us, then I think Caleb's going to have to do it first, and then someone else will follow. He seems to be the one that's been shifting the paradigm for everyone else, and then everyone else fills in the gap. So unless there's someone out there who's just full of gumption, is like, yeah, I'm as good as Caleb, and they actually are close. But that really depends on people's confidence levels and how they feel about their own relationship to Caleb's success. So, and I think most people do not feel like they're on the level of Caleb, whether they want to admit it or not.
One thing that I love that Brett Hawk talks about all the time is the ready room decides. The ready room decides the race. You know, it's so neat to kind of unpack those moments. But Austin, listen, man, this has been so awesome. We're going to have a part 2 in like a month, because you mentioned some things that I want to do some more deep diving into, and you and I will talk about that. But thanks so much for your time on the Fitter and Faster Coach's Corner. This episode will be available either Tuesday evening or Friday morning, and we hope to have you guys come back next week. Austin, how can people get in touch with you if they want to contact you or have questions?
Sure. Direct questions, Austin at procornerpodcast.com. Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, I'm just my name. And I'm the only Austin Surhoff I've checked. So if you just type my name in as the username at Austin Surhoff, then it'll pop up on all 3 of those platforms. I also manage a podcast that is, I guess, in name a cousin to yours, called Pro Corner. No relation in terms of where the name came from, but it is a really nice coincidence that I'm here today. And that is at Pro Corner Podcast for any updates. And that's on Instagram. And then just check out the pod. A lot of what I talk about here, I try to draw out of my guests that I have on the podcast, and we'll have Rowdy Gaines next week coming on. Yeah. And Rowdy and I actually got to chat back when he was at the ISL. But a lot of what we talked about is evergreen content. It's not timely to the ISL, and he has a lot of really thoughtful insights into a lot of stuff throughout his own career and throughout the swimming world. So check it out. And then reach me, like I said, over email or Instagram. Those are the 2 that I check the most.
Austin Surhoff, awesome, man. Can't wait to do this again with you soon. We'll talk soon. Thanks so much.
Bye, Michael. Thank you.
Take care, buddy.